And recording. 3, 2, 1.
This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Maya.
I'm Anais.
And I'm Kenechi.
And on today's show, we are discussing Eminence by Caroline Casper. So, how's everyone today?
Good.
Doing pretty good.
Good.
Excellent. So as part of the introduction, we just want to say that on the website we now have an author spotlight, which we are doing each week. So listeners and readers will be able to find out a little bit about the author that we're featuring. I want to thank all our listeners for their reviews. And if you haven't left a review on iTunes, please do that, or on your whatever podcast system you're using. Please leave a review for us. We'd be very grateful. And on our website, we have the ability to accept voice comments. So you can go there on the podcast page and leave a comment for us before the show, if you so wish. So, anyway, just as an introduction, I'll read a little bit about the story this week. And it's, as I said, it's Eminence by Caroline Casper. The narrator hears that the housekeeper they had when she was young, Suze, is leaving her home in Eminence, Kentucky, and has left behind a box labelled Deborah. This is the name of the narrator's mother, who died 12 years before. In the box is a telephone answering machine that Deborah gifted Suze, on which Deborah would leave messages from a hospital bed. Fearing that she had forgotten her mother's voice, the narrator returns to Kentucky to listen to the tape in the machine, and hopefully the messages left on it by her mother. So, what did we think of the story?
Let's just do our general overview. How did you feel about it, Gerald? Just initial thoughts.
I chose it, so no, I loved it. I loved the simplicity of the simplicity of the writing, and yet the complexity of the narrative. Very, 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 very enjoyable.
Yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was really well written, like really, really well written. And I think in contrast to last week's story, the language used was quite simple, and it was never more complicated than it needed to be. Whereas in contrast to the older style, people used to always try and make it really, describe all these different things. But with this, it was just kind of as much as it needed to be, which I thought was really good. And I also liked the non-chronological nature of the storyline. I liked that. It was interesting.
Yeah, I would agree that I like the setup, the non-chronological storytelling, and I just really enjoyed it because it evoked an emotional response from me that was very strong in a way that some other stories haven't done so far.
Yeah, I agree with the three of you, and so this is really bad because it seems like we all really like the story. I did have a couple places where I was like, but the story was so simple, but also really honest. As someone who's lost my mom, like there was so many little things that someone who hasn't lost a parent might not pick up on, and I was like, whoa. Like, just a lot of little things just struck me as very true, and I agree with it being a very modern, almost minimalist style as far as extraneous words, which made it so that when I did run into an extraneous word, it was very noticeable because the rest of the style was so sparse. And this is definitely a writer that I want to read more of, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think she reminded me a lot of Hemingway in a way that they both sort of tell what can be quite a complex story with complex themes, but it's in a very straightforward style, which is what I prefer.
I think it's funny you say Hemingway because I feel like when I read Hemingway, the voice is very masculine, and this one felt feminine to me. Not that that's a bad thing, but I felt like the narrator, the character, was a little bit of a blank slate in a good way, so that the reader could sort of fill in those shoes. The only thing that was very distinct is it felt very much like this is a story being told by a woman, a very sophisticated, intelligent, mature woman. But other than that, any reader could sort of fill in those shoes. So I'm not sure I would compare it to Hemingway just because that distinction was so clear for me.
Yeah, it definitely agree with you as far as her being more of a tabula rasa as far as a character. You know, she was definitely somebody that you could put your own thoughts and emotions onto because there wasn't a whole lot of character development. Were there any parts of the story that didn't work for you?
I don't think so. Not for me. I think I don't know. I just I just got sort of lost in it. There was enough in the story with the change of times, the change of perspectives. It always kept it sort of interesting, but I don't know. There was nothing I didn't like about it actually. Really, that sounds bad, doesn't it? There must be something I don't like.
Me personally, I thought at times it kind of lagged, and I think that's more because of the way it was written and it kept changing time frame within the story. Towards the beginning of the story, I didn't really know what was going on. So she was telling. I mean, she starts really strong with how when you start from the end and you go backwards, and then this now has 19 minutes. So for me, it was kind of like a ticking time bomb. So I was hoping, suspense, tension, but then when she started skipping, it was kind of like, wait, what happened to the 19 minutes? What is the 19 minutes she's talking about? But then I felt like that only went on, like, just as I was about to get tired, then she kind of went back to the point where she hooked me back in. So it's not really a big complaint, but it was kind of like, yeah, at times I did feel like it was lagging a bit.
And I think that sort of time thing, that countdown was like a subtext running through the whole story, wasn't it? Because at halfway she said, I'm about halfway through the story and halfway to the end or something on the tape. So she kept sort of bringing it back to the fact that it's all to do with the time and listening to the tape.
I liked the time being used as a symbol throughout the story, but I will say I'm going to divide it up into scenes because it was the little things or scenes. The first two scenes I felt like there was some redundancy, and it made it take longer for me to get into the story, even though I loved the content of those two scenes. I felt like one or the other or combine them in some way. But when I read the first scene, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I read the second one, I was like, where'd this come from? And then I read the third scene, and I was into the story by then. But that second scene felt really out of place to me. And it's something that I notice in a lot of works where, when you're talking about a prologue or like an intro, sometimes it's too on the nose. And I felt like, there was so much of the time metaphor that it was losing some importance for me. And I think that time metaphor is super important because you're not only talking about, there's so many instances of time, not just mortality, the time that you have alive, the time that you have as you're growing older, the time that you've lost with your parents, but also the time of memory. Because memory, you think that you're going to remember shit forever, and you really don't. And you do kind of feel like there's that clock ticking, like you are going to forget what your mom's voice looked like. You're going to forget what she smelled like on a Sunday morning. And there is that sense. And I felt like it was so banging me over the head at the beginning of the story that it took some of the meaning away from me. Because we can't all agree.
Yeah.
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
But honestly, those are thoughts I had, so I'm not just like pulling them out just to be devil's advocate. Like
You
I honestly
hate my
like
story.
No, I don't. But that second scene, I was like, this is a little off to me. And then all of a sudden, it went right into so much genius that I kind of just ignored it. But that second scene still bothers me when I think back to the story.
For me, I like the way she handled the time issue. For me, there were some parts of the story that dragged on a little bit. I think there was 2 moments where I looked at the scroll bar to see how much more I had to go. But I don't think. I think it's parts of the story that somebody who's maybe from the South or who understands that culture, how it looks down there, would have loved it because it's like speaking to who they are. And for me, from like, New York City metro area, I'm like, I get it. People in the South are so nice. We know. Like there was a point where I was just a little bit like, that's enough driving.
That's your East Coast talking. You just can't handle people being too nice too long.
I get it. The stranger helped her find the house. Great. I have a GPS. No, but there were some moments where I just felt like I wanted to get back to the meat of the story, but it didn't really detract too much from the overall enjoyment of the story because I think as a reader I'm very patient. Some of my favorite works, there's entire chapters where I'm like, I didn't need all of that, and I still enjoy it overall.
Yeah, and see, for me, I like that aspect of the story. That's one of the things that I liked most about the story is it felt like a slow walk through like a beautiful field. It didn't feel like I'm going to this particular place and I'm in a hurry. Like it was slower, but not slow in a way of I need to speed up, but slow as in I'm watching the flowers and I'm looking at the sky and look at there's a fox down the street, like that kind of slow. And as I was reading it, I definitely felt like she was taking me on a journey. And it was not an easy journey for me because it wasn't that long ago that I lost my mom. And towards the middle, I was like, whoa, this is hitting way too close to home for me. But it was such a wonderful journey that it kept me hooked. And the only time that I looked at the scroll bar was in that second scene. But I'm really patient as a reader. It takes a lot for me to do that. Like, I can read about descriptions of the bluegrass. I love that line when she says people that aren't from here don't realize that they'll actually see bluegrass. Oh. I love that line. Oh my gosh, I love that line. I was like, yes! Every once in a while I get this moment when I'm reading a story or a book where I literally cheer the writer for like a really nice turn of phrase. I'm like, yes! And that was one of those moments where I was like, yeah, you did it. I totally do that.
I have a confession to make. I actually timed myself reading the story after I saw that 19 minutes just because I'm like, I wanted to see if the writer was that amazing that she could comment and say,
I love you, Kenechi.
everyone that read the story would take...
How long did it take you to read it?
It took me about, because I did countdown time, so it took me about 18 minutes.
Wow.
Not bad!
Which was pretty close to what? So I was impressed.
Caroline Casper, writer and psychic.
Yeah. And clock watcher.
That is really funny, Kenechi.
I'm into things like that, I'm into things when, like, works of art, they try and, like, go beyond just, the reading.
Well, what's funny is I actually had the thought, I was like, I wonder if it really does take 19 minutes to read this story. No, I'm not going to record
I had the thought. Yeah, I had the same thought, but nowhere near Kenechi's drive.
Yeah, I appreciate Kenechi's drive. That's why we like it.
It was for science,
Yeah. Very good.
So I wanted to go back to, because I think it was Gerald who had said that it felt very honest. It felt so honest to me as I was reading it that I thought it was mislabeled as fiction. I'm like, is this really creative nonfiction? So I actually started doing a little bit of e-stalking to figure out, like, did this really happen? And it turns out Eminence is real. And it is a very poor town in Kentucky. It's small, only 2.2 square miles, a few thousand people. It has tornado activity higher than the state average. But Caroline Casper had said in some interview that I hunted down and Carve magazine.
Wow, you really did stalk.
I know.
I did. I stalked.
This is weird.
Because I'm like, this is too honest. This has to be real. But she says that Eminence was a part of her childhood, but that the plot and the characters are all fictional, but the characters are based on people she really knows. And I was slightly disappointed because I really wanted Grandma Marge, Aggie, Lou, and Maggie to be real.
Oh, you're so cute, Anais. But I think what this does is it really brings to the point the idea of, by making a place and time really specific, you can make a story feel real. I think a lot of times writers especially new writers, avoid trying to make things too specific because they feel like, well, if this is just a general town that everybody can relate, and actually it makes it less relatable by pinpointing it in time and space. It really cements and grounds the story, and this was a story that was very much cemented in time and space. I actually wondered if Eminence was a real town, but at some point I was like, didn't really, like, again, I don't have any drive this week. No drive. No drive at all.
And you're not a stalker like Anais.
Yeah, and I really appreciated not only just how grounded the story was in the time and the place, but also the town of Eminence, the name Eminence, is a very, like, symbolic name for this story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I definitely felt like it fit the situation. Like, this is important. You know, this experience that she's going through.
That's why I had to look it up, because it was such a perfect name, the town name, for also the story, that I'm like, is this real? So I had to do a little Google.
And it's funny because the town itself doesn't feature that much in the story, apart from the tornado that wipes out Susie's house. And actually, thinking about that, you know, it's crucial, isn't it? Because the tornado wipes the house out, and then the mother gives her the answering machine as a sort of gift.
Yeah, I felt like Eminence was a character. You know, it wasn't that it had to be shown constantly, but the way it was drawn was so vibrant with so few words. It was something that I definitely really appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
It was only when I was writing the summary that I thought, the narrator didn't live in Eminence. It's you know, she knew of it at the time, but she didn't actually live there. And until I reread the story, it felt like that it was her town. So it's quite brave, really, to call the story a town that's not where your narrator comes from.
Mm-hmm.
How did everybody feel about the end of the story?
I thought it was really good. I thought it was really good because I'm still not quite sure how I feel. Like, I'm kind of conflicted over, and I think this is probably because I've never experienced anything like that. I've never lost anyone really close to me. So it was like the way the story was told, a lot of it was giving the reader specific things and specific thoughts and feelings that she had. And with, like, the nature of the story, she's traveling to go and hear the voice of mother who passed away. I kind of felt like, for me, I wanted some of those explicit things to be less explicit and to be left open to the reader to, like, create, like, to fill that void kind of thing. And that's why I like the ending, because the ending did exactly that. Like, she had gone all that way to, hear her mother's voice, and she didn't hear it. And the story didn't give us, her interpretation of what that meant. It just ended there. So it's kind of left to the reader to kind of think, okay, how do I feel about this? What are the implications of this? And that's why I really liked the ending, because I think it gave the balance to the story.
And it's quite interesting that the story starts with 19 minutes to go. So she'd already been listening for 40 minutes to a blank tape. There were no voices at all on that. There was nothing on the tape. So at the start of the story, she must have already been listening to 40 minutes and not hearing anything. And I quite like the idea that it sort of underlines, for me, the idea of the story that you can't go back. You can physically go back and you can see physical artifacts, but you can't recreate what has gone before. So her mother's passed on and her voice is gone too. So you can't, you have to, because my mother died years and years ago. So there's only memories. We kept nothing. We kept no artifacts. We kept, it's just memories that you have of these people. So it's, for me, it felt right that there was no voice on the tape.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was, like you said, starting at the sort of 19-minute mark, drove home the point that it's not just she opened it, heard nothing, and then turned it off. It's really heartbreaking that she listens to the whole thing, hoping just for a crackle, one word, one thing that still survived the damage the tape endured. And I think that's one of those moments where I felt that tightness in my chest.
Yeah. For me, it was very much sitting there and listening to it for that long and then not hearing anything was so just brutally honest. Like, it's painful. I remember my sister trying to get into my mom's computer, and she kept the computer. She couldn't get into it for like a year and a half, and she kept it. Kept trying to get into it just to get those pictures and maybe a glimpse, and that sitting there just strikes me as very painful and very real. It was a very painful story for me. The ending ripped my freaking heart out. and it was something that, as a reader, I appreciate that honesty. And for me, the pinpoint details throughout the story, they were interspersed in such a way that I really appreciated them. Like, this was a story I didn't feel like it needed a lot of ambiguity in order to be enjoyable. I actually enjoyed the specificity of it. And the ending to me didn't feel ambiguous. It actually felt very specific. Because, on a surface level, that's something that happens. It's totally something that happens. But also, you're trying to recapture those memories and all of a sudden they're gone. You're trying to recapture the feel and all of a sudden it's gone. Like, it just strikes all of my little impermanence tingles in the back of my head that I just really enjoyed it. But I didn't enjoy it for the same reasons. I'm not sure if I'm able to convey what I'm getting across. Like, the fact that there was nothing on the tape felt very specific to me. And I felt like the story could not have gone on any longer because the actual story was not about seeing the tape. It was about confronting the death of your mother and confronting the fact that you're still grasping for those memories. Like, that was the point of the story. And so for it to go any longer, any shorter, would have just messed up the arc, is how I felt.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And I think, like, when you said that your sister kept your mum's computer and kept trying to get into it, and that's obviously what the narrator was doing when she was listening to the tape, as Anais said, and she couldn't have listened to 5 minutes and stopped, just in case further on there was something, so she had to listen to the whole tape all the way through.
Yeah. And I want to jump track a little bit away from the death itself to her mother's illness, those sort of final days when she's in hospice. There was one line that stood out for me because it's something, so my mother's still alive, as you know, and it was...
And we love her so much.
Yes. This is super bad. But in the story...
She needs a
Yes,
t-shirt.
she's listening. But in the story, the mother's narrator says something that my own mother, who is not on her deathbed, thank God, and who is absolutely, fine, but something I've heard her say, and something I saw in my grandfather's eyes when he was on his deathbed. And so the narrator's mother says to her, "My body is giving out, sinking like a ship, and I'm here, little old me, still stuck in it." This idea that mentally you're the same person, even as you grow older, sicker, and eventually, wait those last few days, that countdown till your death. But mentally you're still the same person. And that kind of wrenched my heart a little bit because I've heard that from people in my own family. So.
Yeah, that line was difficult for me to read past. I actually stopped for a minute and had to take a deep breath because my mom was in a coma before she died. And I was like, whoa, can't do this right now. I need to go get a cup of coffee. I need to go down to the cafe, get a glass of wine, then I'll come back to the story. Yeah, it was a beautiful line, too. And you're right. It is something that you hear older people say, and it's a very universal feeling. And then to see it just on the page like that, so simply, it didn't have a lot of flourish. It didn't have, like, a lot of crazy artistic finagling. It was just a simple statement, and it was beautifully stated. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny when I lost my father. He went the other way. He had dementia and Alzheimer's, so his mind went first before the body. So we had nothing like that. It was it's the
Complete
body's
opposite.
there. Yeah, the body's there, but the mind it isn't. So it's sort of. So I I've not heard that before that line, but I thought that it's it's a truism, isn't it? It's, you know, if the body's failing but the mind's still going, then it's trapped inside and it can't get out.
I think the only thing worse would be to go crazy and know that you're going crazy. I think that would be the only thing worse that I could think of. Like, if you were like losing your mind and you were conscious enough to know that you were losing your mind, I think that might be just as hard. Like, I can't think of anything like that just seems so universal and such like a hard statement. I don't want to get there.
I think, but don't people with dementia or Alzheimer's or one of those sort of late in life kind of mental disorders, but they know because they have some lucid moments.
Only sometimes. A lot of times when they're lucid, they're not really aware of the times that they're not lucid.
Yeah. Well, Julianne Moore just won an Oscar for playing that kind of fading in and out of lucidity. Yeah. But I think some people do know, and I think that's a different kind of horror for a different short story. Maybe next week.
I'm actually writing one of those stories, and it's not easy to write, let me tell you. Yeah, this story, like, really, it definitely made me... One of the things I thought about the story was that a lot of modern literary fiction seems to be so minimalist that it loses some of its flourish, for lack of a better word. And I felt like the story was really minimalist, but it still had a lot of the artistic beauty that I look for in a story. Like, the things that I liked about the story are things that I like about a lot of classical literary fiction. So it managed to balance being modern and still having some of those elements. And I would like to read it again after more study and to see if I see it differently, or maybe I can pick out what those elements are. Because there's something about this story that's both modern and old. And I want to pick out what it is that she's kept from old that makes it feel the way it feels. Because I'm not a big modern fiction person, and I really, really love the story. And like, what is that?
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't pick up that because I like modern fiction. I don't like old fiction, and I didn't. Yeah, I know.
I know, we're total opposites.
We're such a weird group of...
Fat his wife can eat no green.
I know. Such a weird group of people, aren't we? Yeah, it felt very modern all the way through. Now, what you were saying before, I'm writing something, a sort of Alzheimer's related story at the moment, and it's very hard because the husband, the guy who has Alzheimer's, has to go into a home, and his wife is left behind dealing with that issue and dealing with the, you know, as she consigned him to this place, you know, it's like a prison, and it's a lovely place, but she feels guilty about everything. It's a female trait, isn't it, to feel guilty about everything? There's always something to feel guilty about.
There is always something. You know, how did you guys, like, we've talked a lot about the beginning of the story and how we felt about the ramp up and about the ending. Was there anything about the middle of the story that was notable for you? Because when I look back at the story, the middle of the story, all I can get are impressions of emotions, but the actual, like, content doesn't really stick with me that much, except for that moment when she sees the lady in the middle of the road and she thinks it's Susie and it's not. That moment really stayed with me after the story. Were there any moments for you that stayed or didn't stay?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the moment where she sees the stranger and thinks it might be Sue's, because that was one of the moments where I looked at the scroll bar. But there was another scene in the middle that I liked a lot, which was the sort of chaotic scene where she's supposed to go to the ballet recital and the baby is pulling down her diaper and the other two break the lamp, the older brother and sister. And the reason I liked it is because the way that it was written. We keep going back to the way she's writing this, because in the moment, and probably for years, that was probably a day that, you know, made her feel resentful. She was 13 when it happened, so teenagers are going to drag that out usually. but as she's retelling it now, that chaos of that day, it's told much more placidly. It has what you said earlier, Maya, that sort of walking through the field together. It's sort of like the sting of that memory is gone, and now it's just nostalgia and how that's changed over time. Because the way she would have told that story at 13 is different than at 20, different than now. And I really enjoyed seeing that chaotic moment told with such distance.
I like the contrast in the character of the mother in that same day where she I think she just dropped her stuff and was like, I can't say on air, but
beep it.
yeah, beep, 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 beep. But and then later on in the same day, when she decided to run away, her mother she said something like, "If you're too far away to hear me, it will break my heart." And then she went back inside, and then there was a tornado. It was like crazy day, but I like the contrast of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what Anais said about the different perspective, because you can see at the time there was so much happening and everything was going wrong, and you can imagine being in the house at that point. You would just go, I can't take it, and yet the way she's telling it is just a series of incidents. It's just this happened and that happened, and it showed how close her mother was to her when she came out, because she knew that she hadn't actually run away. So she just came out and delivered that line, and again, it must have tugged on her heartstrings to think back at that and think, wow, my mother really did love me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that struck me about what you said, Anais, about it being like nostalgia and almost from a distance, is, as you get older and your parents are gone, there definitely is a truth to looking back at those moments when, like, maybe things were crazy, or maybe you were having a fight, or that moment, like, when you hated your mom or whatever, and you look back, and the way you look back very much, like, for me, when I look back at those moments, there are moments that, like, I thought crushed me and were horrible, and then I look back and I can chuckle at them, or I'll look back and I will feel that nostalgia, because those intense moments were probably the moments when mom was most mom. Mm-hmm. When she was driving me crazy the most, and for her to capture that moment in the story, but also, like, the metaphor of the tornado, because, like, I feel like this was probably one of the early times when she really realized that her mom was changing. Like, her mom said something her mom never would have said before, and things were crazy and chaotic, and she was seeing things that she didn't really understand. And so I feel like the tornado was also a metaphor for the tornado that was going to become her life as her mom was going to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And that was something that I loved as a reader, and something that I want to strive for as a writer. Like, this is, something I looked at, I was like, oh, I need to learn how to do that.
Yeah. And I think also that you when you become a parent yourself, you then look back at how you react to your children in certain situations and think,
oh God, yes.
Yeah, this feels familiar, and you think, let's try and do this a little bit differently, shall we, this time?
I swore I would never say that.
No, of course not.
Does anyone have anything else they want to say about the story? We're hitting the 35-minute mark.
Yeah, I can keep talking about it forever if you let me.
It seems like everybody really liked the story.
Yeah.
This is disappointing. Somebody has to hate something. It's no fun if we all like it.
Well, I have another favorite line, which has a little to do with the tornado we're talking about, more about her mother wrestling with death towards the end. Because her mother, she says her mother always had a checklist. She can imagine her mother leaving messages on the answering machine for Suze about everything that needs to get done in the house and with the kids. And then the line is, the narrator says, "We're old enough now to know how incredibly impossible it is, no matter how graceful you are, to die politely and painfully at exactly the same time." I love that line as well.
Nice,
So
nice line.
That
yeah.
was a beautiful line. I gotta
Yeah.
say, that was beautiful.
yeah, and I think it captured that what her mother was going through at the end very well. But again, with that distance, because at the time she didn't understand it. She was young, and now with time she sees that.
You know, it's funny. I'm looking at all my highlights because it takes a lot for me to highlight things in my Kindle because it's kind of a pain in the butt. I got the touch Kindle. It's not really that accurate. And so I'm looking at this, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I've got like 30 notes on the story.
Wow.
Like, I'm sitting here, I'm like, whoa.
I thought Anais was the big note taker.
But I think that really goes to show, like, how much thought and emotion this story prompted in me. You know, the fact that I, like, really, you know, it was getting to me, you know, and there are notes like powerful, sounds like mom. You know, I love this. He kissed my forehead. He smelled like sweat and cigars. Like, I loved it because they were two short, simple sentences surrounded by really long sentences, so it was almost like the sentences served as punctuation, which I loved. But then the content of them was just beautiful. Like, I loved that, and I think that is your Hemingway reference that you're probably talking about, you know.
Very punchy, yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, and I normally don't like those short sentences. Like I said, I love my classical fiction, but I do like them when they're done in such a way that they accent the longer sentences. And I felt like that was done very artfully throughout the story.
Oh, something we haven't talked about yet. So I read the story twice. The first time I read it through, I didn't realize she had given away the ending at the beginning. Then I read it over again. I'm like, she tells you everything that's going to happen right at the beginning of the story. She tells you there's going to be nothing in the answering machine, FYI. Like, I didn't know she had already spoiled that at the very beginning until the second time I read it. Did that happen?
Which is
for anyone
interesting.
else?
How the hell? Yeah, it totally happened to me. How the hell did she make that feel fresh at the end when she gave it away at the beginning? I don't know. I don't know if it's because the beginning is couched in a lot of like gray and a little bit confused. You're kind of confused at the beginning, and maybe we overlooked that as readers. But I definitely had that exact same experience. I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
I did like the dogger.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we all pretty much agreed that we like the story. So, should we do the Bradburys?
I think
Yeah,
so.
we should do.
Let's do it. Who wants to go first?
I'll start since it was my story. What's the maximum? Is it 5 or 6?
6.
6. 5.5.
I'm going to give it 5, just because I don't like half Bradburys, and it would take a lot for me to give a story a 6. Like, it would have to be, like, a perfect story, and there were a few things that kind of bugged me. The second scene, there are a few too many hads, and so for me, it was... You like how detailed I got that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Me and my hats. And so for me, it was definitely a 5. It was right up there. Amazing story. Definitely something that I would read again.
I'm going to give it a 4 because I liked it. I thought the writing was good and I thought it was well told, but I couldn't relate to it like everyone else seems to have been able to relate to it, and that's just because of my life, the life that I've lived. So I'm going to give it a 4.
I'm going to give it a 5.5, like Gerald, because like Maya, I think a 6 needs to be, I walk away from this unable to walk away. I crawl away from this, which didn't happen. I didn't crawl away. But I thought it was really good. Actually, one thing as I was reading it, because we keep talking about the language and how good the language is, and people keep saying it's modern, I thought this language is very on trend. It's very like sort of on trend, intellectual, kind of like East Coast, for women writers and MFA programs. I felt a little bit like, which isn't to say it's bad. I mean, I think it'd be kind of ludicrous to say, oh yeah, this is in right now, so therefore it's bad. It was still very good. But it was just a comment that I didn't say before. But yeah, a 5.5 from me.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, and I have the
I have a question for
Bradburys.
Kenechi.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt our flow, but I do have a question, because I know there are lots of times when I read a story that I may not necessarily relate to, but the way it's written, I can still really get into the characters. And I'm wondering, was there any point for you, Kenechi, where you pinpointed that you were no longer in the story? Since you were the one that wasn't able to relate to, I'm just wondering, were you never able to relate, or was there a moment where you de-related?
No, I just couldn't really relate from like the beginning. I mean, it was like obviously when I first started reading the story, I didn't know what it was about, and then I kept reading it. But then I never really felt like, oh, I can relate to that emotion because I haven't been through those things. You know, tornadoes, never seen one in my life. You know, both my parents are still alive and healthy, so I haven't had any of those experiences. And then also I think because the content of the story as well is not something that I would necessarily read, like the narrative of someone's going to a place called Eminence to, you know, hear the voice recording of their mother that passed away. If I saw that as a synopsis, I wouldn't read it. I would just be like, you know, like this is just not my thing. So I guess that's why for me I wasn't that into the story. Like, you know, that's why I have to give it a 4. I can't give it more than a 4 because.
And yet you still gave it a 4. Like that's
because I thought it was really well written. I thought it was quite smart, and it took me 18 minutes to read it as well. So.
Did you give her an extra point for that?
Yeah, I was thinking, it must be worth an extra half for that.
Okay, I just had to ask that. Sorry.
Yeah. Actually, now that Kenechi said that, piggybacking a little bit on that, there was one part of the story where I think the only time I ever sort of resisted the narrator, not that I couldn't relate, but I was just like, so the part where she's sort of justifying why she's going to get the answering machine as if she needs to, like she was like embarrassed almost, where she's like, yeah, I know it sounds weird. I'm like, it doesn't sound weird at all. It sounds like the most human thing anyone has ever done. Like, I don't understand why you're here acting like this is so weird. Like,
but you know what? When you're in that moment, you kind of do think, wow, I'm acting like an idiot.
Yeah. I'm like no one's judging you right now.
Except for yourself. Okay, now we can go on with the Bradbury. Sorry for the interruption.
No,
last week's Bradbury's.
Yeah, last week's Bradbury's.
Yeah. So for last week, we discussed The Circular Ruins by Jorge Luis Borges, and it got a 4 from our listeners. 4 out of 6.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I wish more people would give Bradbury's on the website. Hint, hint.
Oh, you're there.
And should we choose next week's story?
Yay. Here's a quiz.
Ooh.
Here's a quiz. Yeah. It's for the listeners, we decided that that whoever's story is discussed during the show, they run the quiz for the next week. So it's my turn to do the quiz. And
should everybody submit their stories before we do the quiz?
Oh, you can do if you wish.
I'm determined that we are going to read an Alice Munro story eventually. So this time I'm choosing A Mudson by Alice Munro.
I'm choosing, I'm going for the same story I said last week, I think, on Seeing the 100% Perfect Girl by Murakami.
Okay. And I'm bringing back the story that I had for the very first episode, which is The Start of the Affair by Nuruddin Farah.
Okay.
So what I'm going to want you to do is I'm going to ask you have to fill in the final word of the title of a book. Okay, very easy. But no, it's not that difficult. But you have to write it on your pad at the same time without saying anything, so that when I come to you, you can hold up the pad and say, "This is my answer."
Okay.
To stop cheating. Sorry. Okay, nice easy one to start. Are we all ready? Okay. George Orwell's book, Animal.
Oh my gosh, I got that one.
Do you think?
I got it. Go show it.
Any
I
more
can't
rolling?
see any of
Are we
the,
waiting to show?
Right, Anais says farm and farm and farm. Very good. Well done, everyone. Okay. A little bit more difficult. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Tender is the. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Tender is the.
So guessing. I'm so guessing.
Okay. Hold up your answers, please. Kenechi say something? I can't see.
Ooh.
Heart, right.
Heart.
Maya, heart. Anais?
Anais is cheating.
No, I'm guessing.
No. Tender is the night.
No.
Oh, wrong.
We were all like, it sounds like a music lyric.
Okay, this is going well, isn't it? What time do we close off? Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury's The Martian something. The Martian something. Ray Bradbury. I hope there's no guessing. You should know this, he said.
Sorry.
With the answers in front of him.
Science fiction, I'm totally guessing.
Oh.
I probably misspelled it.
Okay, hold up. No. That,
We all got those.
no, that's not
I have
right.
Chronicles.
And Kenechi. What did
Kenechi
yours
has
say?
Hunter.
Hunter.
Please write that story, Kenechi.
And Maya is the winner because it is the Martian
What?
Chronicles.
What? You're kidding me.
The Martian
Wow,
Chronicles.
my
yeah.
subconscious is sucking up information from something because I did not totally guess.
There you go.
Okay, yay, we get to read Alice Munro. Woohoo!
That's good. Very good.
So next week's story is going to be A Mudson by Alice Munro, and we will put the link in the actual post for this week's podcast. And I guess it's me. For show notes and to join the discussion, visit literaryroadhouse.com. You will also find all of our social media links on the website. While you're at it, like our Facebook page, and please leave an iTunes review. It really helps us a lot. Don't forget to tell your friends. Until next time, read a good story.
Bye.
We did it.